Welcome everyone to Building SaaS on AWS. My name is Christopher Logan, your host for today. And this is the show where we talk about the innovations, best practices, and as many of the whys and hows of building SaaS as we can. So today we have a special guest, our very own Mark Promnitz, our Senior Solutions Architect based in Brisbane. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, great to be here.
So today we're going to talk about PrivateLink, AWS PrivateLink, why it's going to be useful, why it can be, and why your SaaS needs it. So Mark, I'll throw it over to you to do a bit of an intro for yourself, and then we'll talk a little bit about why this is an important topic for SaaS builders out there.
Absolutely. So my name is Mark. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect here at AWS. I've been working in and around AWS for a good 10 years or so. Joined AWS just under 2 years ago. And, during one of those times, I've been working in and around SaaS companies, right? That's helping ISVs transition to SaaS. That's, definitely been using SaaS pretty much daily, right, across that time. And one of my core passions for me is really helping businesses use tech better. And one of those unsung heroes, which pops up time and time again, has been PrivateLink. And PrivateLink's all about connectivity. It's one of those pieces where I get to marry up my love of SaaS, but also with the tech side of things. So I'm really keen to dig into SaaS connectivity and have a chat today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for making time and to be on. I know we've got a few viewers out here who are interested in the use cases we're going to talk about and how this is going to help. So let's go straight into it. And so what are the scenarios we're talking about? Why SaaS connectivity? Why private connectivity is necessary? Or what's the use case?
Yeah, sure. Right. Think of any SaaS platform you got out there now, right? What's the happy path? Where does everyone sit, right? Most SaaS platforms are going to be connected and interacted with, consumed over the public internet. This is here to stay. It's a great spot. It gives us that isolation. It gives us flexibility in connectivity options from our websites, mobiles. We can work from home, the office, anywhere really, right? We've got a lot of flexibility. And anywhere with an internet connection, we can essentially reach out, talk to SaaS. It's great. We can definitely secure these things with, TLS. We can authenticate. We've got a lot of, core great pieces happening here. And for many businesses, this public connectivity model works perfectly, and it might be all you need. I guess the real challenge comes in if you have customers where that's not enough, where they want to have private connectivity for various reasons, right? Yeah. So I guess when we look at what public SaaS connectivity looks like, we might have a diagram here. Yep. It really is, you have your end users wherever they might be using whatever clients they have. Typically connecting via over the internet, secured connections, TLS, HTTPS, primarily web-based traffics to whatever your SaaS solution is. And this works great. I guess the next step challenge there is you have customers that might come to you with regulatory compliance or different initiatives around, hey, how best do we essentially secure this traffic, get it off the internet, have it that bit more secure. That can come down to things like zero trust initiatives internally, where we just really want to focus around, isolating, controlling which traffic goes where and authenticate all of that. You definitely have regulatory compliance things, HIPAA, US Privacy Shield, PCI DSS requirements, where customers want to really have strict compliance, regulatory controls over where their data goes and what you do with it. Customers might even just want to have no internet exposure to sensitive data, albeit potentially encrypted across the wire, right? Think enterprise security, compliance, those type of things. And I guess there's also cost efficiencies as well, right? Because we're shipping data out across the internet. There's additional latency potentially for doing multiple hops between your different networks, pieces like that. So there's definitely, some value adds there really around how do we, bring this private, how do we do private connectivity and optimize that, right?
So to sum that up, so that there's, the biggest things that as a SaaS private connectivity, you're talking about security, privacy, obviously, that those zero trust initiatives, regulatory compliance, exposure for, or the zero exposure to the internet, and so cost efficiency, which we'll get into later, is an interesting part of this whole equation as well.
Yeah.
So there's some of the core things that where a private link would be super useful. Is there anything else that is a big draw card for something like this?
Yeah, there's also use cases out there where we send a fair bit of traffic or data between our environment and an ISV or a SaaS platform. Think of the monitoring solutions, your log systems, ISVs of the world. Datadog, Splunk, Confluent Cloud. The use cases here are just shipping metrics, events, logs to a SaaS platform, right? Oftentimes we have data egress costs. There's potentially throughput limits as to how much data you can send through some of those paths. And then you get back to the latency piece around doing all of this, right? I think the key thing around that is that, that pain point's not necessarily directly felt by yourselves as SaaS providers, right? While you're building SaaS, that's a cost, those shadow costs that are hit by your customers, right? Because it's in their environment, so it's not directly in your SaaS environment, so you're not seeing it. But it definitely goes towards it gets indirectly associated with the cost of essentially using your platform. So it's definitely something to keep front of mind and think of ways, mechanisms we can apply to help reduce that. So I guess how do we look to fix some of that, right? And bring some technology to bear in that. And that's kind of where we start talking PrivateLink. So PrivateLink is a really great option, right? For us to facilitate those private connections between your services and your customers' VPC endpoints. Without PrivateLink, there are some common challenges, right? When we're trying to do that private connectivity piece. There's a lot of setup complexity that I've seen over the years. We always used to run into CIDR collisions, IP address, multiple namespaces, not being able to route between those. We'd have to talk about and work out how do we do VPN connections, how do we, do the bespoke natting of different services, and it was really quite complex. There was a lot of operational overhead, maintenance costs associated with just facilitating this private connectivity. And I guess that's the world where we want to try and stay away from, right? That's oftentimes the reason why SaaS platforms really haven't, embraced doing private connectivity, right? Unless there's a reason for it. I guess enter PrivateLink, right? Now, and some of the benefits that can come from that, right? We can definitely look to, secure your traffic. So that's one of the key benefits of going private, right? Keeping that traffic off the internet, doing that. We can, simplify a lot of that network management. One of the amazing points of PrivateLink is that it does, separate your IP address spaces. We can drop, and without getting into the tech, we'll do that in a sec. You can absolutely avoid having to do the network routing and your NATs and your VPNs between different environments. It allows you to drop an endpoint into your customer's VPC in their IP address space and just have that natively, come out inside your service without having to, worry about those overlapping IP address ranges. Because I guarantee you, right, as you scale, it might work for one or two customers. Longer term, though, those customers, private IP address space tends to get reused over and over and over, right? It's not an infinite space. So you're going to have multiple tenants that have the same ranges. And how do you essentially do that mapping without, collisions and all of that? It gets really messy. PrivateLink really helps to solve for that, right? It's definitely got, how do we accelerate and help people move to the cloud in there as well. And it definitely does reduce costs, especially with, of data transfer going through, say, NAT gateways, internet gateways, especially as you're egressing that traffic out of the customer's environment into that SaaS platform, right?
Amazing.
So I guess to explain how PrivateLink works, we can look at the technical architecture for that. It's something like this, right? You have your service. That's the boxes on the right there, where you're looking at the instances. That could be whatever that looks like inside your environment. The architecture of PrivateLink is really quite simple. We deploy a network load balancer in front of that, and that's really to front your service. You can then register that network load balancer as a PrivateLink service, which is essentially going through and saying, yes, I want to register a service. It's on this NLB. It's on these ports. And then, the third piece is really deploying VPC endpoints, interface endpoints, into your consumer or tenant VPCs, which means that the consumer of your service, so the instances on the left there, are able just to hit that internal IP address for that VPC endpoint and have that natively just naturally flow through into your environment, hit those instances behind the network load balancer without having to worry about VPC peering. You don't have to worry about network address translation, the proxying, network routing, any of that. That just works. They could be on the same IP address range as your VPC. Again, with PrivateLink, it kind of, it definitely abstracts that and just helps that to work, right?
Well, that's a big deal, right? The VPC peering has been around for a while, but to be able to simplify that whole thing with PrivateLink is a huge deal for a lot of customers. That can get tricky. That can get messy. I mean, we had Alkira on a little while ago who was trying to essentially do networking as a service, and PrivateLink looks to simplify even further as well.
Yeah, and I agree. My PrivateLink is definitely networking magic. It's as close to networking magic as I've seen in a long time. You don't have to worry about all of this stuff. The traffic almost instantly teleports across and shows up in a different network. It's great, right? We all know it's not magic. None of this is, but it's as close to networking magic as we can get. And there's a ton of real world use cases. PrivateLink's been around since 2019. We've got other things where, we're actually using it day to day. And I bet you're already using PrivateLink potentially without knowing it. The VPC endpoints you deploy for our AWS services, they're all powered by PrivateLink. AWS, the technology is solidly proven. We are using it everywhere to help get those services deployed as endpoints inside your VPCs today. It's a really common, it's a really easy service to get on and get using. And the complexity here is not in what you need to configure or do, right? It really comes down to how you're going to use it and how you want to use that moving forward.
Awesome. So Mark, let's take a look at a bit of a real world implementation. How do we do this?
Yeah, so fundamentally, right, PrivateLink needs a VPC endpoint to deploy into, or needs a VPC to deploy into, right, to drop that interface endpoint into. The key challenge, I think, with that is that it requires that AWS environment, right? And the first question that I see a lot of, that I would run through as a SaaS provider is very much, does my customer have an AWS presence? They may not, right? For a lot of platforms, that may not be a requirement you want to place on your customers, right? Just to be able to facilitate this. So there's, you're likely to have tenants in both camps. Let's be brutally honest. There'll be some that have an AWS presence and can absolutely you can drop the interface endpoint in and essentially away you go. There are others that won't, right? And then there's the case of, okay, how do we still support them? How do we still give them the best customer experience and enable that private connectivity for them? And that's one of those challenges, right? Like, when do you ask your customer through the onboarding process, anything like that, if they've got an AWS presence? I typically would probably do that around the time when we essentially the question comes up, right? Of do you have private connectivity? Do you support it? I would have it as a response flow to that, saying, hey, look, we absolutely do support it. Do you have an AWS environment where we could drop an endpoint into? Something like that would pop up, really nicely. When I think about supporting customers with an AWS presence, it tends to look a bit like this, right? We have a network load balancer. It's deployed across all the availability zones within a region. Your services behind it again. And we can drop those endpoints into essentially your customer-controlled VPC. So that's in their account. They've already chosen their availability zones, their subnets, their CIDR range, all of that. They might have resources already deployed. And really getting that dropped into their network means that they can target a local IP address, pops out a network load balancer and directly hits your services that are behind it. It's a really nice way of doing that, right? In terms of the other pieces around what we need to do there, is that this is unlike peering, it's very much a customer initiated connection. So there's no way for you from your service to reach back out into their environments. It's very much customer initiated. They hit the endpoint, they start up that session, the TCP back and forth session against an API or a web service, anything like that. So there's really great security benefits, I guess, over having direct VPN connectivity into your SaaS provider VPC, because the risk from a customer's perspective is very much look, I like your service, but I don't trust you fully, right? I'd really rather not, let you be the conduit for me being compromised or anything like that. So having a really strong security story around, hey, we can hit the endpoint and we initiate that connection, solves for a lot of problems, especially when it comes audit time, how you're doing interactions, all of that, from a customer's perspective. It's also a really strong story for your customers, right? When they're looking for those regulatory controls as to how things are happening and how it's going.
Interesting.
The thing,
Mark, there's a before we go on, there's a question from one of our viewers. So what is the advantage compared to zero trust or using a VPN?
Okay. So in terms of VPN connections, just to start with, right, is essentially joining two networks together. That could be an IPsec connection. That could be OpenVPN. Pick your poison, your technology for how you're constructing that. But essentially, you're wanting to join those two networks. The challenge you hit with that comes back to that network routing problem around IP address ranges. So if you're using like a 10.0.0.0 /24 or something like that, right? 10 dot range, and your customers are also using that. You need to be able to essentially point across that network connection to say, where do I route the traffic to? Having the same IP address range, to make it simple, is a bad thing, right? Because it's really hard to know where do I send the network traffic. Oftentimes you'll find that as you're going through and doing this with a lot of customers, the first customer, might fluke it. They're on a completely different range. Cool, I can route that. That's not a problem. I can set up my filtering rules and it goes where it needs to. As you have 2, 3, 10, 100, 1,000 tenants, the odds of you hitting multiple customers with the same ranges, is almost, almost guaranteed, right? That you're going to hit that, or you're going to have someone that goes, oh, I just use this giant, enormous range. Please route everything like that to me, right? So as a SaaS provider, you 100% want to avoid that. But at the same time, I don't think you want to necessarily say, no, Mr. Customer, you can't use a VPN, or you can't use your zero trust SD-WAN network with us or anything like that. You probably want to be in a world where you can kind of support both. So one of those, for customers that already are using VPNs and zero trust networking into AWS, is to drop your endpoints straight into their VPC, kind of leveraging their existing infrastructure thing. So if they're working from home and they've got their zero trust SD-WAN, networking connectivity, all they have to do is hit an internal IP address on their network and they can connect to your service. That would definitely be an advantage there, right? So I don't think it's an either or. I think this is an and for SaaS connectivity, just to try and help with that. And pointing to the CIDR range piece is probably the key one you want to try and work through, right? Without that, natting, source destination route natting and everything like that becomes a horrible mess. And that's what we're solving for, right?
Thanks, Mark.
So I guess back to this, the only other thing when you're deploying and you're doing this is that you want to essentially override the DNS that customers are connecting to, right? So if you're going to example.com and that was your front door, your public connectivity path, which in this model you're still keeping, by the way. If customers try and resolve that, they're still going to go to your front door, right? That still resolves to your public endpoints. You want your end users in those controlled private environments to essentially route to those VPCs that are deployed within the network, right? So these ones down here, sitting in the availability zones. Yep. To do that, we can use things like private hosted zones within your VPC, your internal DNS, essentially customize the DNS and where it resolves to, being internal IPs. Very common way of doing that. Or using internal application configuration, which we might be able to dive into a bit later if given time. The documenting how to set this up, get this working for you.
We got you on mute. There we go.
All right. In terms of, we know how to work within an availability zone inside the region with customers that have a VPC. Yep. How should we approach ones that don't, right? Like, we still want to work with those customers. We still want to deal with that. The way I see that working best is essentially you taking on the ownership of that VPC. As the SaaS provider, you stand up and you run SaaS provider edge VPCs. It's really easy for you to template these out and have them available, have them work in with your existing environment. And essentially, it's the same picture here, right? It's the same model around how we have our service. We have our network load balancer. We're deploying it into the availability zones. But essentially, you're managing and you're running this, right? The difference being that when you spin it up, you ask your customer for what's the IP address range? What's the CIDR range you want us to use for this VPC? So that they can route to it and it just becomes an extension of their network. By doing that...
This is for customers without an AWS presence.
Yeah, so if you've got customers, I'm thinking doctor's surgeries or anything like that, where they're trying to interface with your environment. They don't have an AWS presence, but they still want to have private connectivity, right? Because it's sensitive data, it's HIPAA data, it could be PCI data, or whatever it is, right? How do they best connect into your SaaS platform and so essentially make them do as little work as possible, right? Back to this answer and how this works. By owning that VPC for them, you can have it in an IP address range that they can route to. And then based on that, they can either spin up a direct connect or a VPN connection. That could be the IPsec. That could be an open VPN connection into that VPC, right? Yes, they will have, just native network connectivity essentially through to that VPC. But you're just dropping in those IP addresses, right? Those VPC endpoints for your connectivity piece, and you're essentially facilitating that for them. Back to, I guess, zero trust SD-WAN kind of approaches. Like, you could take it to the point where you actually allow them to deploy something into that VPC, or you could deploy it for them, and you could actually set up, rather than going VPN or direct connects, right? You could deploy an SD-WAN, endpoint in there and connect that into their network. Because essentially you're letting that work as their network, right? And you're helping to control that edge between them and yourself and really facilitate that private connectivity. This works really, really well, and it scales phenomenally well because you're just duplicating VPCs, right? And that networking construct. It really is just working out how do you want to work, how do you best help customers connect to you, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it is. And it typically is in the middle of that onboarding flow where you're trying to drive customers to, time to value is a real thing. How do we get them on? How do we get them realizing using value and seeing that value? This is one of those ways that we can absolutely, look at doing that and building that out.
Amazing. So there's another question here. Nitro bands.
Yeah.
I assume the
So
DNS server is for resolving FQDNs.
yeah. So in terms of, just back to, I guess, the example previously, right? In this model, you will still have public endpoints, right? I don't expect any SaaS company ever to turn off their public endpoints, because that's fundamentally the happy space, the model, right? This is kind of the opt-in private connectivity path for those tenants that require it. So on that, it comes down to how you want to implement, and essentially, how do we tell our clients, the end users and all that stuff, their applications, be it a single page application, be it a web page, that they need to connect to these internal VPC endpoints. It's essentially, that's the piece that we're trying to solve there. So with the DNS servers, it really is for overriding the DNS resolution, to get the requests through to that. The interesting piece to think about, is if customers move outside of that managed environment. So you might have private, customers that have opted into private only. And if they go and work from home, all of a sudden they don't have access to that DNS server. They're still hitting that endpoint. That in that environment where there's no DNS essentially overrides for your fully qualified domain names, they could be hitting the public endpoints of your SaaS endpoint, right? Essentially, because PrivateLink facilitates that connection. It doesn't enforce that it's private, right? So there really is a piece there to think about around, okay, if your customer has opted into private connectivity, is it only private that they want, or are they willing to accept that, and how do they want to manage that? And we can absolutely build into our SaaS platform the way to essentially manage that and track that, right, and redirect traffic as needed.
Okay, amazing. Okay, shall we? So, what would be lovely is, so we've talked about why private connectivity is important for a SaaS company. We've talked about PrivateLink being a major option to go and employ, and the benefits of PrivateLink, where we talked through the complexity, so zero trust, regulatory compliance, cost efficiency. Now, let's see. So we've got the theory. Let's see. Let's talk through what this looks like in real life, and an actual customer that's been able to put this in place and show our viewers what it looks like in real life when a customer wants to implement this, and how they actually gain the benefits of PrivateLink.
Yeah, sure. Right. So I guess the case study that comes to mind, right, is really one of our customers called TextNow. They are a company that really has derived a lot of value from using PrivateLink. They're essentially started in 2009. They run a VoIP application which gives you a US phone number, free phone number, and unlimited calls using Wi-Fi. Primarily in North America and the regions around that. You can buy SIM cards through them now, and really they've gone nationwide, and they're serving a lot of traffic. I think it's fair to say they're serving a fair bunch of traffic. The numbers I've got, that essentially their application's been downloaded more than 200 million times globally, 80 million times in the US during 2020. Their applications receive around 20,000 requests per second during peak times. Like, they're absolutely operating at scale. Yeah. And one of the challenges they faced during COVID is that their companies were reducing ad spending, right? And a lot of their business model revolved around ads for essentially that free service, right, for the communication piece. They started looking at their bill. Where can we save money? How do we analyze that? And what can we do to, essentially save us some money as we're going through it? They looked at their bills, and they saw their outbound data transfer fees from their AWS environment were averaging, between $500 or $5,000 and $10,000 monthly costs for TextNow. It can become a consideration for companies that are operating at scale, right? That are sending a lot of data out, and then they're working through that. So I guess they dug into that, right? And they're working through what's causing that. Like many companies, they leverage a number of third-party ISV partners across, essentially across the internet. One of these is Datadog. where they were using application performance monitoring, network performance monitoring. You know, that again, they're one of those companies where you ship a lot of metrics, right? You ship a lot of events, you ship logs out to get the insights and derive value from that platform. And they identified, you know, the data that was going out to Datadog as being, you know, a key contributor to some of that data egress, right? Now, Datadog supports PrivateLink connectivity. So they worked with Datadog to go and get that done, to implement that. They used infrastructure as code to roll that out. They say it took them just 5 minutes to roll that out with a quick change, dropping the environment into their environment. But yeah, from a customer's perspective, that's a pretty low touch change from their side of things, right? Obviously, you know, I don't want to discredit how much work Datadog's probably put into this equation to make it seem, you know, that nice and that easy. They would have how-to guides. They would have, this is what you need to configure. They've built it into the application a bit, right? To help optimize for the seamlessness of what that transformation looks like. But by switching that across, they were able to drop their data transfer fees by 93%. Just by no longer sending that traffic out via a NAT gateway, probably. And I don't have the details on their exact environment, right? But the data egress probably went out your NAT gateway. It probably went out the internet gateway as well. And by shifting that across to the PrivateLink endpoints, that data egress rate changes from about 9 cents a gigabyte, I think, in the US East regions, down to a steady rate of 1 cent per gigabyte egress. As across the PrivateLink connections, right?
I mean, that's enormous. That is enormous. I mean, you're talking about something potentially $10,000 a month going to a tiny like a tenth of that.
Absolutely, right. And I guess as you scale up your traffic, it just gets more, right? As you have more customers, your business grows. That traffic volume just increases. So, absolutely, optimizing is a good thing to do there.
Okay, that's huge. So the benefits for I mean, this is for the benefit is from TextNow essentially using it, but also Datadog in being able to support this.
Yeah, right. It's not something Datadog would have had visibility of. Yeah, let's be really honest, right? That those costs and stuff were something that TextNow was seeing, and that they were facing as part of using the solution. Right. So if I was doing any kind of cost attribution inside my business, I would be attributing that to the vendor that's, you know, using it, right? Because it's the cost of using that solution. By having this as an option, Datadog definitely, you know, potentially help keep the customer, right? Because if they're sitting there going, hey, look, this is a significant cost for us now, the answer there is, okay, do we need to switch the platform we're using, right? That's a real question that comes up. So by having the capability to switch it and get this customer win, right, where they're able to do a 5-minute change, get the 93%, you know, data transfer free reduction. That's amazing. That's huge. And that's really where it plays. Obviously, they also increase their data security by no longer sending logs, metrics, stuff out across the internet. It probably means that the data gets there a bit faster too, right? Because we have latency via the internet, and we've got a more controlled, you know, faster connection path internally. Using the AWS, you know, Hyperplane, the backhaul network, all of that, where, you know, we can absolutely, you know, almost guarantee that level of reliability and the number of hops essentially between two paths. For Datadog, I'm assuming it was a relatively simple capability for them to set up and implement, right? I don't see inside their business, but again, it boils down to, it was a network load balancer. You can register it as a service, and you can essentially use it to pass through back to your application load balancer, your back-end systems, things like that, without, you know, directly impacting your public, you know, ingress path. It's an additional capability, which is relatively easy to stand up and provide. So
I'm just posting a few of the links in terms of what PrivateLink is, how to use it, you know, getting started docs that we publish on our website. I'll put them into the Twitch chat for anyone that is interested. I'll also put the link to the PrivateLink partners that we have. So
Yep.
like Datadog and some others for people who want to see, how can this be a reality for your SaaS as well.
Yep.
Mark, so if there's more things, so look, we have gone through why SaaS connectivity, why private connectivity is important, benefits, why AWS PrivateLink, the enormous benefit for TextNow. I mean, the cost itself is a massive bonus, but security and everything else, obviously, big benefits of it. So if you want to learn more, so we do have a skill builder course, right?
Yep. Yeah, we've absolutely got a skill builder course. I'm sure the link. Yeah, thanks for posting that. The skill builder course is there. It takes you about an hour to jump in, to learn it, to use it. Again, the actual implementation side of it, not super complex. But the value that you get from it is right. So that's a free e-learning course. Please just jump in there, give it a go, spin it up, and see what you can do. Right.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll also put the TextNow. So we'll just talk through a case study. Let me link to the TextNow case study as well. That'll be in here. I've got a question here. I'm not sure I can answer that one. Does this contribute to any of the certs?
The answer is unfortunately not, right? So in terms of, does it contribute to your learning, to your knowledge around the certs? Absolutely. Does jumping into Skill Builder and doing any of the training courses in there help with that? Absolutely helps you pass those certs. Does it contribute to actually doing the exam and passing that? Unfortunately, that's on you, just like it's on me every time I go and sit the research, right? You got to know the knowledge. So I don't know if PrivateLink specifically comes up in the certifications, but it's one of those core capabilities that are attached heavily to network load balancers. So definitely something to look at and know, and it does help simplify a lot of that networking constructs. Like we've talked about it in the SaaS context today, but there's a lot of internal networking, between different services. And use cases, just within your business, where it can apply as well, right? But again, conversation for another day.
So PrivateLink is already used fairly extensively internally to AWS and across those services, but it is one of those things that does not get talked about in a customer context often enough, right? Like that's still. It's kind of why it's a bit background magic, where it's not up front and center. We don't push it as much as the value of it.
No one shouts about networking, right?
No, they don't.
It definitely is the enabler.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And look, the benefits are clear to see, and I think we've gone through that in the show. They can be huge. And they can be actually relatively simple and quick as well. Like we're not talking about months of development to get this enabled at all. We're talking about very, very simple and very quick to turn around, quite a significant saving, and added security, added privacy, which is only becoming like those three things this year, regardless of what you're talking about, have been probably the three biggest things any customer has talked about in 2023.
Yeah.
It's massive. So if PrivateLink helps do that in a much simpler way, it's certainly something to start looking into, and a bit of a secret source for a lot of our customers, where they can start looking into that more. So look, links are all there. Mark, thank you so much for joining us and talking through that and answering these questions, which has been awesome. If you've got any more questions about PrivateLink, have a chat to your local solutions architect, or those links probably give you a very, very good overview. And that TextNow case study is an awesome one with Datadog as well. So thank you again, Mark. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being on.
Yep. More than happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So the show will be back. I think in 2 weeks. Although we'll be back in September. We've got at least 1 or 2 more shows left for the season. The show scheduled for 2 weeks' time will be pushed off for a week, but we'll be back next month. So thank you everyone for tuning in for Building SaaS on AWS, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.